our story, we're going to talk a little bit about scales. Okay, so there's lots of different kinds of scales. And these ones I have here today, these are called bathroom scales, right? But we don't use them to weigh the bath. What we do is we put them on the ground and we stand on them. We call them bathroom scales because usually we like to do it in private, where no one else can see what that tells us, because we don't want anybody else to know. And does anyone know what kind of scales these are?
Luggage scales.
Luggage scales, that's right. And as you all know, I work on airplanes. So I have a set of luggage scales. I'm not too bad because I can get away with it. But if you come on as a passenger, if your luggage is too heavy, you won't be allowed to bring it on. Or you'll have to pay extra. So it's always a good idea. You put this through the handle of your suitcase, and you lift it up like this, and it's really hard to do because it's not really manual handling done well when you do that. The big heavy suitcase, and that lets you know if your suitcase is going to be allowed to come on board our aircraft. Now, these next two scales, they do the same job. One's a bit kind of old-fashioned, and this one's got a nice digital display here. And we use these if we're going to bake a cake. Okay, so you pour things in until the needle gets right round to exactly where you want it to be. Then you know your cake's going to turn out right. Now, when I was little, I used to help my mum to bake. And I remember, we're talking about like well over 50 years ago here, so, you know, I do remember my mum had scales. I wish I had a set that I could bring for you to show you today. And her scales were different, and I had to help. Every Friday she baked. If I helped, I got to get it on as soon as it was out of the oven, so I was keen to help. So her scales were different. So in those days it wasn't grams, it was ounces. So if she needed 8 ounces of flour, she had a scale with 2 sides on it, and I had to look for a metal block called a weight, and I had to look for one that said on it 8 ounces. Okay, so there's 2 sides on her scales, and they're sitting like this. And I put the 8 ounces on this side, and it goes way down. And she starts pouring in the flour until it comes back to level, and then we know there's exactly 8 ounces. The same as the weight that I put on, that's the amount of flour that was there. But I also had to be very clever, because if she needed 6 ounces, we didn't have a 6 ounce weight. So this is where the maths came in. I had to think, well, I could put 4 ounce weight on, and then I'd need something else. What else would I need? A 2 ounce weight. So if I had a 4 ounce and a 2 ounce, that was 6. Then she could start pouring in whatever it was she needed, and again, it was measured correctly. A bit like, have you ever been to the park and played on a seesaw? Yeah? Have you? Yeah? So I used to love a seesaw. And you see, whenever you're on a seesaw with somebody the same size as you, it actually doesn't go anywhere. You're stuck unless you push it. But if you're on a seesaw with somebody heavier than you get stuck away up in the air and you're stuck there, you can't come back down because they're so heavy. They brought their side right down to the bottom. But if you're the one who's heavy, then you come crashing down to the bottom with a bump. Has that ever happened? No. The next time you're at the park and you're going on a seesaw, get your mum or dad to go on the other side and see what happens. But look, getting back to our scales, I've got another set of scales here. These are a bit like my mum's scales. Right, okay, so let's see. Who's good at maths? You good at maths? I bet you can do some of this. We'll get Denzel up first, and I'll give you an easy one. No, don't want to? Okay, Denzel, you come up here, okay? So what number is this? 10. Okay, so I'm going to put a 10 on this side. Oh, it's very heavy. Now you need to find some numbers that will equal 10. So you're going to go for a 9 and a 1. Yay, it works. Well done. Anybody else like to have a go? Claire's not here, so I know she would choose to go anyway. Let's try an 8. Is that what you're going to go for? A 6 and a 2. It works. It's balanced. When both sides are the same, we say the scales hard balance. Thank you very much, Janice. And you know what, I tell you what, we can play with it at the end. That day? Are you going to have a go? Come on. Now, three arms, tree. Alright? Tree. Yes? Okay? And all of these are one. So we need one. Another one. Two. One more. Three. Yay! See? Now we're going to go to our story this morning. And if you listen, you will hear about a different kind of scales in our story. And our story today is still taken from the book of Daniel, and it's Daniel chapter 5. And now King Nebuchadnezzar has died. He's no longer the king. In fact, it's many years later. And it's his grandson who is the king. His grandson is King Belshazzar. Now, King Belshazzar is having a party. He has invited 1,000 guests. Wow! Imagine having a party with 1,000 guests. That was some party. And they were having a great old time. And then during the party, King Belshazzar thought to himself, And he sent his servants to get something. What he sent them for was some gold and silver goblets. Now they're kind of special cups. You know they were special because they were made of gold and silver. In my house they're made of china or maybe out of glasses, but we don't have any gold or silver cups. But that's what he wanted, because he wanted to show off. So he gave them out to his best friends. So him and his best friends, they were drinking their wine from the gold and silver goblets. But these goblets used to belong to the temple of God. And his grandfather, King Nebuchadnezzar, had brought them to Babylon at the same time that he captured people like Daniel, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. But he knew that those were from the temple of God. And King Nebuchadnezzar put them into his treasury, but also King Belshazzar knew what they were and where they were from. But he decided, as I said, he wanted to show off by just using them in his party just to have drinks from. And at the same time, they were worshipping the gods of gold, silver, and bronze. But then, while they were having a great time, something very strange happened. A hand appeared. Nothing else, just a hand. Now that was scary. Imagine if a hand suddenly started floating around here. What would you do? Well, I'll tell you what King Belshazzar did. His knees started to knock, his face went so pure white, he couldn't even stand up, he was so scared. And the hand started to write on the wall. He was terrified. What on earth's going on? What is this? And he called for some of his wise men to see if they could tell him what the hand was writing and what it meant. But no one could tell him, so he was really frightened. What? What's happening? How? Why? What does it mean? Just then, King Belshazzar's mum came in, and she said, listen, don't be so afraid just yet. There's a man in this kingdom called Daniel, and we've all kind of forgotten about Daniel, but he used to work for your grandfather, King Nebuchadnezzar, and at that time, Daniel was able to interpret dreams, and he was able to solve riddles, and he was able to help King Nebuchadnezzar. Call for him. Maybe he can tell you what is going on here. So King Belshazzar sent for Daniel. And when Daniel came in, he said to him, are you Daniel? Can you tell me what this writing says and what it means? And Daniel began. He said, King Belshazzar, some years ago, when your grandfather, King Nebuchadnezzar, was the king, he was a mighty, powerful king. And the nation of Babylon was strong and mighty, and everything was good. But King Nebuchadnezzar was full of pride. Remember, we heard about this last week. He said King Nebuchadnezzar was full of pride. He thought he was so good, and he didn't need God. And God was trying to talk to him, but he wasn't really listening properly. There did come a time when he was happy for other people to believe in God. Then even later, it came that he actually respected God himself. And he wouldn't allow anyone to make fun of Daniel or to say anything against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego for trusting God. He respected God. but he still didn't take God for himself. And then Daniel said that it came to happen then that God allowed your grandfather, King Nebuchadnezzar, to become ill and go mad. And he thought he was an animal, and he lived like an animal. He wasn't proud then. He just lived in the fields like all the other animals. But then after 7 years, Daniel said, King Nebuchadnezzar, your grandfather realized that it was God who was in control. Even though he had been king, God was the one actually in control. And anything that he had, his might, his power, his wealth, all of that was because God allowed him to have it. And Daniel said that at that time, when he acknowledged that God was in control, then God gave him his kingdom back. But Daniel said, King Belshazzar, you know all this. You know what happened to your grandfather, and yet you have ignored God. You have not considered God at all. You don't even respect God. Here you are in your party, drinking from gold and silver cups that belong to God. You do not respect God. And so now I'm going to tell you what this writing means, what it says and what it means. You see, God has sent this hand to write this message for you. Daniel said, the writing says, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. Well, what does that mean? Daniel said it means numbered, weighed, divided. Okay? What does that mean? So, Daniel said, God has numbered the days of your life and of your kingdom and brought it to an end. He has weighed your life in his scales, and he has found that you do not balance. Divided is that now, because of that, your kingdom is going to be taken away and divided among other nations. Well, that very night, King Belshazzar died. Another king took over, and the kingdom, the once great kingdom of Babylon, was divided between the Medes and the Persians, other nations, exactly as Daniel had said. So you see, God had weighed King Belshazzar's life in his imaginary scales. And King Belshazzar couldn't say he hadn't heard. He was brought up knowing the stories of what had happened to his grandfather, King Nebuchadnezzar. And God doesn't look at what you have or what you can do. We know that God looks on your heart. And God's standard is a pure heart. And King Belshazzar didn't measure up. Actually, none of us measure up. We don't measure up to God's standard. But we do know that there is something that we can do to help us to be right and in balance with God and look correctly on God's scales. So coming back to my scales here today, you know that we all have sin in our lives, and people talk about sin as being a heavy burden. Sin weighs us down. Now, we can try to be good, we could be kind, we could be helpful, we could come to church, we could read our Bibles, but it's not working. It doesn't work. That will never, ever work, no matter how many good things you do. That will never work to make our lives balance in God's scales. What we need to do, as King Nebuchadnezzar had learned, we need to ask Jesus to come into our hearts. We need to admit that God is in control, no matter who we are. Should we be the king or the president or anything else important, that's not good enough. We need to have Jesus in our lives and admit that God is in control, and to allow God to be in control of our lives. And that is the only way we will ever measure on God's scales. Now, you know that God was patient with King Nebuchadnezzar. God talked to him and tried to speak to him, even though he wasn't always listening, and eventually he did. Because at first King Nebuchadnezzar had never heard of God until Daniel and Meshach, Shadrach and Abednego, they told him about God, and eventually he did, as he realised. King Belshazzar did know, but he didn't do anything about it. And I have to tell you here this morning that everyone in this room, everyone watching or listening online, you do know, now you've been told. If you didn't know before, now you do know. The only way that your life will ever balance in God's scales is if you have Jesus in your life. And that is the only thing we can do. Remember this. God gives life and breath, but God can also take it away. And we must make sure that our lives will measure on God's scales. Now we're going to sing. So, we're going to sing, I'm in right, out right, up right, down right, happy all times. If we have Jesus in our lives, we might still do some things wrong, but when God looks at us and we can ask for forgiveness, he will see a balanced scale. Because we're in right, out right, up right, and down right. We may not always be happy and laughing all the time, but we will have happiness in here because Jesus has washed away our sin.
You have to fix the feelers when you use the opportunity.
Right, okay, so we're going to do it a couple of times and we get fast for each time. You ready?
I feel like I'm walking away my sin. I've been right up, right up, right down, I'm happy all the time. I've been right up, right up, right down, I'm happy all the time. I've been right up, right up, right down, I'm happy all the time. Since Jesus Christ came in and washed away my sin, I've been right up, right up, right down, I'm happy all the time.